We're live.
Okay. Today is January the 10th, 2011. This is the start of an interview with Mr. Walter James Dexter at the RSVP offices of Catholic Services of Macomb, located at 26238 Ryan Road, Warren, Michigan. Mr. Dexter is 63 years old. He was born May the 4th, 1947. Mr. Dexter currently resides at 13651 North End Street, Oak Park. My name is Dave Brousseau. I will be the interviewer, and Gary Miglia will be the videographer. Mr. Dexter, would you state for the record the branch of service that you served?
U.S. Army.
All right, if you don't mind, we'll go back to your high school days when we can get the introduction of how you got into the service and perhaps a little bit about your family at that time.
Okay, actually, okay, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was 17 years old when I had, joined the Army. I didn't finish high school at that time. I dropped out in the 11th grade, and things were a little, kind of tough in the family at the time, and I was looking for something different, and so I decided I was going to join the Army. And of course, I had a lot of family members were trying to talk me out of it, because they were trying to tell me that, hey, there's a war over there, and you can get killed and this kind of stuff. But I was just ready for the challenge, I guess, even though I was 17 years old. My mother had to co-sign for me to go in, and she co-signed, and I joined the Army, and basically that's how I got in.
What on earth would give you the feeling you needed to go into the service at that particular time, at the height of the Vietnam War, with all this negativity going on? Can you share that with us?
Yes, I can. To be honest with you, what happened was I had an incident in my father's car. I wrecked it, and what happened, he didn't have any insurance, and every time I sit at the table, he would always be hounding me about getting a job, getting this car, and things like that. So what happened was I just got tired. I said, well, if I don't get a job, he's going to kill me probably for the car. Or if I go to Vietnam, I can get killed. So I said, I'll take my chances in Vietnam.
Do you think you were well versed on what was going on over there?
Not really. I didn't know a lot about. The only thing I knew about Vietnam were, what I seen. I was young then. What I seen on TV, and of course at that time they had protesters that were protesting the Vietnam War, and basically the negative things that you would hear in the newspaper and on TV about the Vietnam War. But as far as me having a whole knowledge of what was going on, no, I can say I really had no idea.
Okay. What did you feel about school at that time? You say you dropped out. Was that you didn't like it? You weren't doing well, or a combination of?
Well, I liked school, but I used to love to play basketball, and I played basketball in junior high school. I got to high school, I played basketball the first year, but then they changed the way of doing business. You had to keep a certain grade level up in order to continue to play basketball. And so my grade level, it didn't meet the challenge. So what happened was I just got distraught. I couldn't play basketball anymore, and that was my life at the time, basketball and baseball. So basically I got discouraged and basically just wanted to do something different.
That's a pretty heavy basketball orientation in Cincinnati.
Yes.
It's just heavy.
Yes.
And it's on the kid's mind all the time around that neck of the woods. They've got some storied basketball history in Cincinnati.
Yes, they do.
What made you choose the Army?
Well, I guess because falling back behind, I had two brothers that went to the military. One brother, he was in the U.S. Marine Corps, but then I had another brother in the U.S. Army. And the one that was in the U.S. Army, when he came home, I guess I spent more time with him than my brother. He was my older brother. He was much older than I was. But the one that was in the U.S. Army, spent time with him. And basically just followed behind him because he went to the Army. So I decided to do the same thing.
What did he think about what you were doing?
He didn't. He was one that in the family that was trying to talk me out of it by telling me, "Hey, did you see TV? They had this many vets got killed in Vietnam, and you sure it's what you really want to do?" And so he was one that really tried to, because he was in doing peacetime, and he really didn't have any experience about war or anything. But
So how big was your family?
okay, I got four sisters. And I got four. Excuse me. I got four sisters, three brothers, including myself.
Ooh.
I have one sister in Huntsville, Alabama. My older sister. I have another older brother that's in Nashville, Tennessee, and I have two other sisters in Cincinnati, and I have two other brothers in Cincinnati. So there's 8 of us altogether.
4 sisters,
And four brothers,
including yourself.
including myself, right?
And where were you?
I was in the middle.
In the middle?
And I was in the middle, right?
God bless your mother.
Yeah.
What did she think about this?
Well, she was one who actually signed me to go in, but it was hard convincing her of signing because she was another one that didn't really want me to go or anything, but I just kept begging her, basically, "Mom, please sign." And so finally she discussed it with my father, so finally she decided to go ahead and sign.
Now, who had gone in before you already? You said your brothers?
Yeah, I had a brother in the U.S. Marine Corps, Eugene. I had another brother ahead of me. He's 67 years old. He was in the U.S. Army.
So this wasn't new. She'd already gone through.
Right, she'd
all
already
this.
gone through it, but except for they were in there doing peacetime, basically.
Yeah.
There was no war going on.
Okay. You get out. Where do you go first? Boot camp?
Yeah, we had basic training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. That was in '66. It's kind of funny. You go out one door, you're in Kentucky. The other door, you're in Tennessee. So, but it was Fort Campbell, Kentucky. We had basic training there.
What'd you think about that?
Basic training was very different because I wasn't used to getting hollered at. Number one, the drill sergeant, he was a hollerer. I don't think he'd ever talk because every time he opened his mouth, he hollered. And it was something hard getting used to because I never really got hollered at like that at home. But then it was something that after a while you get used to. It was different. We had basic training and we had go through an obstacle course. Of course, it was always the same thing. You had to climb over a wall with the rope, come down, crawl up under fence, with your body down, things like that. Then we had
Somebody shooting at you?
No, don't base training. No, it was not like that.
No?
Right. I went through that through AIT. I had advanced infantry training in Fort Polk, Louisiana. Right. Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Yeah. Now, Fort Polk is the
It's
debarkation to Vietnam.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
right. Exactly.
So if you go there right after boot, you could count on it.
Oh yeah, you knew where you're going.
You're visiting
soon.
soon.
You're right. Very soon. Right.
What else can you tell us? How long was boot?
Boot camp. I vaguely. I know it was like 8 weeks. I think like something like 8 weeks or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Some were 6, but.
Yeah, 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. Yeah.
8 is what I recall.
Yeah.
Did it get any better after you were there a while?
Actually, it did because actually by that being my first time away from home and being around other people, but I was brought up to respect. I was brought up in the church. My father was a deacon in the church. Mother was a pianist in the church. I sung in the choir, and I just had the mentality of respecting everybody. So regardless of how strenuous it was, how much they hollered, the respect was still there. It was something I knew that I had to do, and I just respected. I figured, well, the government, the Army told them what to do, and I respected that. So that's why they had too much of a hard time there. Right?
Well, there's a purpose behind all the shouting and shock and
The discipline.
Yeah.
Right.
At first the breakdown and then the rebuilding.
Right.
They just mold you into what they want.
That's true, but it carries you. It basically carries you all the way through life. Really, I can say, personally.
I suspect someone like you, for whom it is a shock, but something that you won't forget.
No, never.
Good. Any other things that went on at boot that, you know, are worthy of discussion here?
Well, I can recall, one thing I did learn that when you're in the Army, you never volunteer for anything. I found that out.
How long did it take you to learn that?
It took me about 3 weeks.
3 weeks,
Yeah,
wow.
we was in formation, and the drill sergeant, the guy that hollered all the time, he hollered and said, "Does anybody out there got a driver's license?" And I said, "Oh." You know, my mind was like, well, maybe I can get a job. My thought was, maybe I get a job driving a Jeep or something. You know, so I raised my hand. I said, "Sir," I said, "I have a driver's license." He said, "Step over here, soldier." I felt pretty good about it. And then all of a sudden, he said, he said, "You see that field out there?" I looked out there. It was a big, wide field. He says, "What I want you to do, I want you to drive that lawnmower. I want you to cut that grass." It was one of the power lawn was a push lawnmower. And so the guys started laughing and stuff. So I mean, it was hot that day too in Kentucky. It was hot, and I pushed that lawnmower, cut that grass. I was like, you know what? This is a lesson. I'm never going to volunteer for anything.
And they say it just like he did to make you feel like you felt.
Well, like I felt,
it
right,
all worked.
right.
It all worked.
It worked, right.
But there was a lot of learning going on.
There was a lot of learning going on, right.
What's the other one? Never volunteer, never complain, never volunteer. There's another one.
Never explain.
And I remember this.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody told me, fortunately, before I wanted to be a hero, so I was lucky.
Right.
But you don't realize how many times that comes up.
Darn quick.
So you're not alone. Okay. When is your first opportunity for liberty or a pass or?
Okay, actually, when in basic training, we had I think I've got like a 3-day pass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 3-day pass. That's the only thing I had in basic training, was a 3-day pass. There was a little town called, it was in Kentucky, I can't think the name of it, but we didn't really do much, you know, because we didn't really know anybody in the town and stuff, so we basically, you know, went out, had a couple of beers.
And that's a real southern town.
Got a room and, you know, but it was really nothing fantastic.
So you didn't really get a chance to go home until the end of
Just
basic.
in the basic training.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're talking 6-8 weeks, probably the longest you've ever been away from home.
That's true. That is absolutely true. Right.
Were you able to write home during that time?
Yeah, I did write, but it wasn't a whole lot to write about in basic
Yeah.
training because at that time really didn't know a lot. I didn't have any idea ahead of time what we're going to do. So I just basically just wrote and just asked questions about what everybody else was doing. I just never talked too much what I was doing.
Well,
Right.
on the other side of the line, it was your mom trying to figure out, is he still alive too? I'm
Right,
sure.
right.
All right, at the end of basic, they put you through a plethora of testing to find out what you got that they need.
Right, exactly.
How did that turn out?
Well, actually, I was basically, my mindset was, I just knew that I was going to Vietnam because really we were basically told when we got there, maybe 2% might have went somewhere else, you know, engineer or something, but basically I would say 95% of the ones that went through basic training with me end up in Vietnam. So regardless on what you did, you was going to end up in Vietnam.
And your first assignment probably gave you all the evidence you needed when you got to Fort Polk?
Yeah, Fort Polk, we had extensive AIT training. It was sort of like a simulation of Vietnam. They had, you know, the terrain, the jungles, the mosquitoes.
Where was this?
In Fort Polk.
Georgia.
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Louisiana.
Right. And so basically, after we went through that, and then then from there we shipped out and went to Vietnam. From there.
How long were you there?
At Fort Polk, we were there about 4 weeks. About 4 weeks.
That's all.
In Fort
right?
Polk, right. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 4 weeks.
What was it like when you came home at the end of basic? How did you feel about?
When I came over basic, you know, a lot of my friends would say, hey, you know, I already knew I was going to Vietnam, and they would say, you going to Vietnam? They said, well, you know, I mean, did you get drafted? I'm like, no. I said, you know, I was 17, I got joined. So why'd you join? And like, well, you know, I didn't really have an answer. You know, people ask me these questions. I didn't really have an answer at that time. You know, you're 17, and it wasn't political then because you didn't know too much about politics. Only thing that you knew that you were just, I mean, you can't say at that time you was going to fight for your country because nobody really into that. I was just getting away and being on my own, you know, and doing a job, you know.
Growing up.
Yeah, growing up, and you know, so I didn't get involved with the political side of it, you know. Of course, I heard more political side of it when I got out than I did when I was even over there, you know. I was over there, we didn't hear it too much,
No,
except for
you
the
wouldn't.
leaflets that they dropped trying to brainwash us.
Yeah, they didn't believe you needed to know that.
Right.
Which is probably the politics behind the Stars and Stripes, to keep it, tell them what we think they need to know, and
Right.
not what they
Exactly.
need to know. And
Right.
what are you feeling? You come back, or do you go direct from home? Did you go direct to
Yeah, we
Vietnam?
went to California. We left out of California. We derose from Cincinnati, and then I went to California, and that's when we derose from California. We left there on a plane. It was, I can't think of the name of the plane, but I know when you sit in it, you'd be sitting backwards. It was kind of odd going over there. You know, planes going this way, but you're sitting the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And I've never been in anything like that before. It was really odd. And
So what did you feel like?
like it was like it wasn't real. At that time, I felt like that. Oh well, I'm going to Vietnam. It's like a play or something. I mean, I know it's crazy. It may sound crazy, but it didn't seem like I was really going to be fighting. That everything we went through as far as the training and basic wasn't real. I mean, it was real, but it wasn't. The Emmy wasn't real. Went to AIT, it was real, but it wasn't real. You had simulation, everything. So I always felt like everything was going to be simulated.
Were you scared?
Yeah, but you know, I wasn't scared because at that time I wasn't. I wasn't scared until we actually landed, and then I started looking around and hearing stories and stuff, and that's when I got scared. Right, you know.
Have you developed some friends at this point, buddies?
Yeah, but I got tired of being called Cherry. Cherry was somebody who hasn't seen action yet, you know. So I didn't have a name. My name was Cherry. Hey, Cherry, you know, because I was new over there, haven't seen no action, didn't have a CIB, and so my name was Cherry. So after a while, you get brainwashed. Your mind is saying, "Wow, you know, getting tired of getting called Cherry. I can't wait till I hate to say it, I can't wait till I kill somebody, or till I wait till I get into a firefight so I can not become a Cherry anymore." But it's funny how, you know, you become a product of your environment.
That for sure.
Right. It wasn't real me, but it's just I just got tired of being called a Cherry.
So where did you land when you came in?
We landed in Pleiku. I was with the that first year I was with the 25th Infantry Division. We landed at base camp in Pleiku. That's where we landed, and we were.
Is that the southern part of?
Yeah, that's
Vietnam,
southern part of
isn't it?
Vietnam,
Yeah.
right? Southern part of Vietnam, right? And you know, there's base camp, and they
Are
had
you familiar with Chu Lai?
yeah, July,
Okay.
yeah, July, Anke, Benoit,
Mhm.
all that, you know. I think that the first cab I think was in July. I think
The first.
first cavalry.
Uh-huh.
I think they were stationed there. First cavalry division, right?
So how long did it take you to get acclimated? And then how long did it get you to outlive the Cherry?
Well, actually, about 4, maybe 5 days, because we were in base camp about 3 or 4 days, and we were going on a search and my first mission, which I'll never forget, was a search and destroy mission that we had. In other words, we were not supposed to take any prisoners or anything like that, and search and destroy anything that we found as far as compounds or as far as bunkers or weapons, destroy them. And that was my first mission. It was a 3-day search and destroy mission.
So they what, they helicopter you to
Yeah,
a location,
to a location.
and say goodbye and
Right.
be back in 3 days? Or?
Right, exactly. And then we weren't supposed to receive any food supplies for 3 days because what happened? Because they didn't want the helicopters coming in and out getting supplies. So we was equipped with 3 days food supplies, 3 days ammo, you know, ammunition, 3 days of sea rations and
How
all
big
the good
a
stuff.
group are we talking about?
Okay, well, I'm thinking of company, but it broke us down into 2 platoons. You know, our company was about it was hard to say. A company which was like a company, it was probably maybe 50 some troops, but platoon wise, broken down into platoon, was like around maybe 14 in a platoon. I was, you know, part of the platoon.
And you had a specified area you were supposed to
Right. Right.
scavenge to,
Exactly. And later, matter of fact, on that first mission, I can remember, that some of the villagers that were Viet Cong. See, over there, you had three. A lot of people don't realize we had three elements of people who we were fighting against. You know, not, a lot of people think it's just one. It was three. We had the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were more or less like militants. They wore black pajamas and they, you know, they wasn't organized. They were just mad because they didn't like Americans or something like that. They maybe took snipered at you, set booby traps, something like that. And then you had the NVAs, this North Vietnamese Army, and they were, you know, organized and prepared, more equipped, things like that. Then, believe it or not, you had your Pavlin soldiers. Your Pavlin soldiers were Chinese. A lot of people didn't know. They never talked about it, but the Chinese were actually fighting with the NVA over there, and they were like, they were bigger, you know, because we had a firefight, we did a body count. A lot of times when you look down, you see somebody, you think of American, you look down and somebody big, but he's wearing like a Vietnamese outfit, and you realize he's not Vietnamese, because most Vietnamese, when you do a body count, they're small, you know. But you see somebody that big, and I realize that this guy's not Chinese, you know. So they were Pavlin soldiers. They were actually Chinese that was really fighting with the NVAs. A lot of people, they never talked about that. I don't know why. The government never talked about that, but it was Chinese that was fighting with them.
were these Chinese part of the Chinese army, or were they just descendants that came out to be?
Well, some say they were interpreters. Some say they were even special forces. So today, I don't really know.
Okay. No, I didn't know that, what you just told me. So, doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. And they never talked about that. No, you know.
What you feel when you say you didn't know anything, most of us didn't either. And most of us probably still don't.
Right.
Because that was not something talked about.
Right.
For obvious reasons. Okay.
Right.
So you're no longer, what's the next stage now? You were Cherry, you're now through that. What's
Okay,
next?
through that, and then we had other CAs. We did combat assaults that we did over there. Combat assault is a CA is when you know helicopters. You got the helicopter driver, you got the gunner, you got 3 troops on the right door, you got 3 troops left door. A combat assault CA is when you go into a hot area, helicopter comes down, and once it hits the ground, you know, we get off, and most of the time the area they had to clear the area for the helicopter because it's called landing zone, make a LZ, a landing zone.
Who would do the clearing?
Well, they had engineers that was over there.
Oh, I mean physically clearing.
Clearing the area.
Yeah.
Sometimes they had engineers. Sometimes we had to. Sometimes we did it unless we was making a CA. You know, make a CA. The area is already cleared. You know, but we were going to an area. We would have maneuvers, and we would take our machetes. We had C4. We would blow an area out for the helicopter.
Were you aware of whether that area was occupied? Was there
well, no,
intelligence that told you?
No, we knew that it wasn't occupied.
You knew that it
It
wasn't?
wasn't occupied at that time.
How did you know that?
Well, I guess they had LERPs that went out there ahead that already had canvassed the area and knew what was there, knew what wasn't there.
What'd you call them?
LERPs.
What's that?
LERPs were like, they went ahead of the units. I don't know really what it stands for, but we call them LERPs. They went ahead of the unit and filled the area, kind of sweep the area to find out what's there and what wasn't there. Right.
Okay, now tell me how you're feeling.
Now, you know, actually, this is actually the first time I had opportunity even, you know, talking about it. But I think it changed me in a way that I don't complain about things what the average person may complain about, because it's like, you know, I used to complain about not having no shoes on my feet until I looked around and seen a man with no feet. So regardless of what, you know, your situation is, it's not bad. I don't care. You know, it's just not bad, because there's always somebody that's in worse shape. And I don't think I would have learned that concept had been in the military, because when you're in the jungles for you do without a lot of things. You know, we don't have refrigerators out there. You know, we don't have electricity. When we drink water, we get it from a creek, and we had sometimes you see mosquitoes going into your water. We had purification tablets that we put into the water to purify the water, but you can see bugs going in there, but it, you know, it's nothing. But when you come home, you know, everything is so much different that how can you complain about anything? Even today, how can you complain about anything?
That's an interesting analogy. You've gone through your first exercise. Have you seen death yet?
In Vietnam?
Yeah.
Yes, the first, matter of fact, the first firefight that we seen death. We had went through this village, and what happened was, you never forget your first firefight. At the time, we didn't know that the villagers were actually, they were Viet Cong, but they were perpetrating to be farmers with the rice. And we went through there, and we was in the village, and the lieutenant was questioning some of the VCs. Well, they were VCs, but at that time we thought they were villagers. He said, "Are you VC?" And they said, no VC. And so anyway, there's a little kid that was standing by the doorway with his thumb in his mouth, and he looked over and the little kid did like this here, little bit, he did like this here.
Oh my God.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. You know, and of course he couldn't see because he had his back turned.
Yeah.
And then so what happened? We put our weapons. There was like 8 of them. So we got them. We tied them up, and then we was under sniper fire. There was actually the Viet Cong was there stealing the rice, I think, from the farmers. They were stealing the rice from them. That's what they were there for.
Mm-hmm.
So after the scene, that's time out. So we were getting sniped at. You know, we heard shots. They was in trees, and they had a couple. So that's my first firefight. And then so we just start shooting back.
So what do you do with the ones that you captured?
So when you started fighting, they was already tied up basically. Mm-hmm. So they were just laying there. But we were getting sniper fire from around the building and the trees. They were up in the trees. They were sniping at us. And so that's what happened. So anyway, so what happened? That's the first time me actually seeing someone that you're actually shooting at. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of other firefights we had, we followed them through the tracers. Like you didn't see them because like at nighttime, you seen their tracers and you knew where they were at, but you couldn't see them in the jungle. You know, but you fired at the tracer. You know, right? So that was my first firefight.
So what was the exercise with the sniper fire? Was there any attempt to suppress it?
What happened? They left. They ran. Okay, because the distance they wasn't really close, but they were close enough to maneuver. So what they did, they ran, and so it was kind of hard calling in because normally I know the 25th was good at calling in air support. It was kind of hard calling air support because we were too close. We couldn't call in air support because they would have fired probably on some of us. You know, so basically they ran. You know, they ran away. And then the ones that was already tied up came back, and there was a couple of casualties. We killed like 2, maybe 3. It was maybe like 8 or 9 of them or something. So 7 got away. We killed like 2, and we had no casualties that day. That first firefight. That was my first one. Right.
So you brought them back to be
they called
questioned and interrogated.
They interrogated, but like they went back into base camp. They we put them on a helicopter. They took them back to base camp, and I never seen them anymore. You know, I mean, not saying they did anything with them, but they questioned them. I don't know what they did with them after they went back.
So you never found out whether any capture led to any additional evidence, information that would be useful. You know, how important was interrogating these Viet Cong, and frankly, how much did they really know?
Right. Well,
themselves.
Well, actually, I mean, what happened is a lot of times they'll have maybe maps and
Okay.
maps on them, or where maybe you might have other elements where the other companies located at, which is helpful. Maps on them,
Mhm,
you
okay.
know, or they might have information about you. You know, you find out what they actually know about you. You know,
Mhm.
they might have something.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
okay, okay. So how'd you feel about that trip?
The first trip to Vietnam,
The one you just mentioned,
that was
the first fire?
it was unusual. You know, it was unusual because it seemed like that it was still at that time. It seemed like it was a dream. You know, it just seemed
Yeah.
like that it wasn't really real.
Mhm.
You know, it wasn't really real at that time. It just seemed like that it was just I'm still in training. You know, basically,
Mhm.
right? I guess because at that first firefight we didn't lose anybody,
Mhm.
and at that point it seemed like that it was a game. You know,
Mhm.
basically. You know, I'm what 18 years old. You know, and at that point
It would seem that sometime, somewhere along the line, you come to the conclusion that you're there
right,
and you're responsible for you.
right,
Because there ain't anybody around here gonna do much to save me.
right, exactly,
I'm responsible.
right, exactly.
I mean, the minute I got aboard ship
Mm-hmm.
and I saw some of the people aboard ship,
Right,
I've gotta be taking care of me. These people aren't gonna be doing it.
right, exactly. But you know, actually, but the second firefight we had, it was really wow. We were making a CA, we were making a combat assault, and remember getting out the helicopter, and what happened was my strap had got caught, and we were finna jump out. My strap, I had you know all this equipment on. I wasn't no big person at the time. I was my weight, maybe 155 pounds. I was small. I had all this stuff on me, you know. So I was fixing to jump out the helicopter, and my strap got caught in some kind of loop that it had back here, and everybody else had jumped off, and I got ready to jump, and I couldn't get loose, and the helicopter had already landed, was starting to descend back up, and I was trying to. So I was like, I was telling him, "Can you go back down?" He was like, because I guess it was a hot LZ. So what happened? So I finally got loose, and I just jumped, jumped out, and my back was all, it was messed up. I mean, it was sprung, my leg was sprung. That was like a bad feeling. And at that time, I didn't know we was under fire at the time because with the helicopter, with the blade going, you couldn't really hear anything.
You hear the bangs,
right.
You don't know what.
Right. So, but when I seen everybody else, then I start seeing dust coming up from some of the other guys that already got out. It was coming up, they were crawling, so I just followed behind them, did the same thing. I said, hey, we must be under fire. I seen the dust shooting up. So we started crawling, and so I had my head down, and I was crawling, and I'm thinking that my steel pot we had a steel pot with a helmet lighter. So I thought I hit a branch because I had my head down, and my steel pot it came off my head like that. So I just reached back, got my steel pot, put it back on my head, and I just kept crawling. And so it was like I say, so it was like at night, and we really couldn't see where it was at, but we knew we were getting fired upon. And so anyway, so they called in the air support, the housers, and they had the planes come in and spray air where they was at, and then we did a body count that morning, and it was just terrible. We lost, and a friend of mine named James Lindsay, he was from Florida. He got shot, and he was maybe 20 meters on the side of me. He got shot in his butt, and he hollered, medic, 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 and I crawled. He's a good friend of mine, and I crawled over there to help him and pulled him back behind this tree. And so that day we lost maybe like seven or eight in our company that day. And what happened? I was sitting under the tree. We were eating our sea rations, and I had my steel pot sitting in front of me. And so one of the other guys said, "Hey Dex," he say, "How do you get the hole in your steel pot?" And I was like, "What hole?" He said, "That hole." I picked my steel pot, looked at it, and a bullet had went through my steel pot and creased my helmet liner and went out. I didn't even know it.
That was when you lost your helmet?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, because it was with the noise and everything, I'm thinking I might have hit a branch, but I had my head down, and they had a lot of brush area where they had trees down. So on my mind was like, I hit a branch and it came off. So I just picked it up from my head and come to find out I actually got shot in my head. Bullet went through my steel pot and creased my helmet liner. And it's a funny thing, they had some representative from, it's called Sepia magazine. They just had to be over there. But they actually put that article in the paper. That was in 1967 in Sepia magazine. But my family seen it, you know, but I've never ever seen it. I was still over there during the time, you know. Yep. Actually got shot in the head. The bullet went through my steel pot. And
Now how do you feel?
Now?
At that time.
At that time, then I knew it was real. At that point,
That brought reality.
that brought reality in. That's it. This is real here, you know. And that's when I really started getting scared. Right. But it was a lot of more. See, I never fooled with like drugs over there, but they had a lot of troops that were indulging in you know, marijuana, heroin.
Where did they get that?
In the villages, you know, in the villages, like they had it. It was just plentiful over there, you know. It was just plentiful, you know, and you know, they called it consol. That's what they called it over there, consol. And they were selling like big bags of consol for like $5, $8 for a big bag like this here. So a lot of troops, I've been so plentiful, so cheap. A lot of troops were getting tied up, you know, get caught up on that, you know. But
I mean, you're responsible for your life.
Yeah.
Why would you want to put yourself in further danger?
I know. I think
maybe stress, maybe
it's
trying to get away from
reality.
Yeah.
Reality of it, and a lot of them, it just made them feel good, you know, because it just you know, wasn't a good feeling, you know, to see death, you know, see someone that you care about laid out, you know, and I had and then maybe 3 or 4 days later we had another firefight. But we were going to the Khantoum Providence. It's like mountains. It was close to the what's that border? It's close to the close to Cambodia border. But we weren't supposed to cross into Cambodia. But it was I remember it was close to the Cambodian border. But it was like a neutralized country. NVA wasn't supposed to be there, and we weren't supposed to be there. But I think the NVA was still sneaking over there, you know, some kind of way. But I had a friend of mine, one of them name was Major, and his best friend was named Minor. We were going up to Khantoum. We were going up there to get on level ground, and we were helping each other up the hill, and everybody was extending their hand, reaching out, you know, for the next person to get up, and then we reached the hand out. But Major was right behind Minor, and Major, instead of him sticking his arm out, he stuck his M16 out for Major to grab hold to. And what Minor did, he thought he had the M16 on lock. It wasn't locked. So when Minor pulled around, right in front of my face, I was like right in front of my face. He got like a 6-round burst in his chest, and it killed him. And that did it. I was like, from then on out, it was like cold-blooded. It was like, man, you know, these Viet Cong. And then you get angry because you say, hey, you know, to get back, you want to get back so bad, you know, for what happened. So it gets personal there, you know. Yeah.
And that stage, you're probably better prepared to take care of yourself because you're angry,
yeah, rather
than scared half to death.
Right. Exactly. And then you just become immune. You just things that happen, you just deal with it, whatever happened. You know, we had a lieutenant that came from OCS. He was fresh out of OCS, officer candidate school, and he had a bad habit of kicking, things, you know. And so we told him, we said, you know, that's not a good idea, you know, on the trail. You kick it because sometimes the Viet Cong, they'll booby trap stuff, you know. But he just wouldn't listen. He had a bad habit, you know, some men where he just kick it. And one particular day, I forgot what was in the trail. It was wasn't a doll, but it was something left out there in the trail, and he kicked it, and it was booby trapped, and it blew half his body off. And that was a terrible thing to see. And what happened was, he was, I mean, he was hollering and screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming. And they called the medic, and that's the first time in my life I ever seen what that medicine they shot him with, which was what was that medicine they had? Um, he actually his whole torso was actually almost missing. Actually, I know his right leg was missing, and part of his other leg, like you see nothing but flesh up in here. And they gave him I forget whatever medicine I forget it was. They shot him. Medic shot him with it, and we were standing over him, and all of a sudden, about 2 minutes later, he just started laughing. And I just couldn't believe a person can be messed up like that and start laughing. And I kept saying, whatever medicine they gave him, I can't think of the name of it, but
Is it morphine?
Morphine. Gave him morphine, and he just started laughing.
Well, they put you on a high and you don't feel the pain.
And that's my first time ever experiencing anything like that.
Is there anything they could do for him?
No, he died. Well, I think they sent him to the rear and stuff, but we found out he did die. Yeah, he did die. He did die. Yeah. And then what happened after about maybe 6 months? I came down with malaria. I ended up at Cameron Bay. They had a hospital called Cameron Bay. I ended up at Cameron Bay. They had 3 different types of malaria. They had Vivax malaria. They had falciparum malaria. Then they had the black malaria. If you caught black malaria, you wasn't never coming back. Falciparum was treatable and Vivax was treatable. But I had the virus. I had the Vivax malaria. So I got shipped to Cameron Bay Hospital. I spent 30 days. Now actually, you're supposed to spend 30 days there, but actually I spent like 40 days. I spent like 10 days longer than I was supposed to, because I did something. It wasn't nobody's fault but my own. I stopped taking. We had malaria tablets that we were taking. That was to prevent the troops from getting malaria out there in the jungle. And what made me stop taking them was I seen other guys stop taking them. They would get malaria, and they would come back telling all these fantastic stories about Cameron Bay being in the rear, about it's beautiful, and I was like, hell, I'm not taking mine either, so I stopped taking the malaria tablets, and I came down with Vivax malaria, and I went to Cameron Bay for 40 days actually. I really was supposed to do 30, but I'm young at the time, and I wanted to stay as long as I could, and they were taking your temperature, your symptoms of it was, you ran a fever, eat, and, stomach pains. Those were some of the basic symptoms. And so what happened, and your fever was the main thing. So once your fever went down, then they basically released you and sent you back to your unit. But what I was doing, which I know wasn't right, but what I was doing, while I was in the hospital, when the doctor would come by, I would take I would take it out of my mouth, and I would take the thermometer, and I would rub it on my pajamas. It was wrong. I know it was wrong. I rubbed my pajamas. By the time he come back around, but temperature was still there, and so naturally I stayed a little longer. So one particular day, after about 10 days, they decided to take the thermometer and put it in my rectum. And they put it in my rectum, and it gave the right reading. They shipped me back, so. I shouldn't have told that. My wife.
Imagine you were overjoyed.
I was overjoyed. My wife said, "Don't tell that. Don't tell that." But it's the truth.
So what's your feeling now about going back?
About going back?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm no way. I couldn't fight a flap over there. I wouldn't go over there going back. I would go back as far as I wouldn't mind going back as far as visiting some of the areas of where we were at,
Well, let's go back.
Okay.
You finally get checked out of the hospital, and what do you feel about going back?
Oh, go back to my unit. Okay, well, when the unit was at base camp, I went back. They wasn't in the field. They was at base camp. They was at Playcool time. Went back to the base camp, and basically we stayed in base camp for about. And then I got to learn about the mortars, about the M60 millimeter mortars and stuff. But they had the base camp. They had the mortar platoon that was there, and I got to, you know, fool around with that. They taught me about the grid coordinates, elevation, and you probably vet yourself, right? You're a vet yourself, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, you probably know what I'm talking about, right? But
Yeah.
they taught me all about the elevation, and I get interested in that. And sometimes I would, when they found out that I knew something about it, and sometimes I stayed back and worked with the mortar platoon. Sometimes the mortar platoon stayed in the rear, and sometimes the mortar platoon went with the company. I guess out there in the field.
But typically in a mortar operation, you're not hand-to-hand type stuff.
Right.
It's from a distance.
From a distance, right.
And I mean, the bad part of it is you gotta be damn accurate.
Right,
or
exactly.
You end up blowing up your own
Right,
people.
true. That is so true. Yeah, right.
And there takes some smarts to operate the elevation and all that other kind of stuff. There's no place for a dummy.
No,
or a
no,
screw
no,
up.
no, you're right, you're right. One mistake and you can wipe out your whole platoon. It falls short.
So how much longer did you have to be there after you came back from the hospital?
Okay, we were in base camp Play Cool for about maybe like a week. And then we moved out and we went on patrol. Because you know, they don't really, when we go on these missions, a lot of times you don't find out what the mission's about until it is all over with or you're already there. But ahead of time, they didn't tell you anything. We just know we were going on patrol, you know. So I remember at one point we had to walk in this, was it a lake? Because they said we had to walk in the lake because they didn't want us to leave tracks so the VC or the NVA can find us, so we had to walk in this lake, and the water was like up to here, you know, so we had our weapons up here and our equipment, so we were, you know, walking through the water, and I wasn't really a big person, you know, at that time, like I said earlier, and so what happened, we were walking through the water, and I was walking point that day, because we all took turns on walking point. You know, point man is you had to walk in front of your element. I guess you was like the person that, so if there was Viet Cong out there, he's gonna get hit first. You know, they didn't want everybody together. So it took me a while to realize what was the reason for a point man. But anyway, I was walking point that day, so I had a weapon up here. We were
Well,
walking.
you're looking for
Right, for
stuff.
And
None of it good,
not
but you're
good.
looking
Right,
for
we're
stuff.
looking. And I remember what happened. I was walking and I had slipped on this green slimy rock or something, but I went backwards and I couldn't pull myself up. And I was like, it was a nightmare. So I'm down there underwater and I'm trying to pull myself up and nothing was happening. I couldn't move or anything. So I said, man, so it just seemed like you're down there so long, you know, because, you know, I was smart enough if I breathe, I know I'm gonna die, you know. And it got to the point where I just couldn't hold my breath anymore. And I said, I just know I'm gonna die. I know this is the end of it. But just by the time I get ready to breathe, something grabbed me on the back of my collar and pulled me up. And I was breathing, and I was like a miracle. A guy named, I still remember his name. We called him, what was his name? He pulled me, he saved me. I can't think of his name, but that was a terrifying experience. They almost drowned over there. You know.
I mean, all of that's going on, you're gonna end. Your son died because he drowned falling backwards.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
God.
And you know, that was just, you know, terrible. You know, it was terrible. You know, but and then again, I had a lot of, then the thoughts came to my mind about, you know, why am I over here? Why am I over here? It's like I can get killed. And you know, I had my girlfriend, well, actually my fiance, she wrote me a letter, and and sometimes we had our mail dropped off in the field, and she had wrote me a letter. Her birthday was, I forgot when it was, but, and she asked me, she said, how come I didn't send her anything for her birthday? And I was like, I couldn't believe it. We was in the jungle, I'm like, she's thinking about her birthday. So I wrote her back and I said, out here, there's no CVS, there's no drugstore, Perry's, and nothing like that. I said, I couldn't see anything. I was like, she got to be out of her mind.
Well, she's living in her own world,
Yeah,
and she doesn't
true.
know. And
Yeah.
It seems so out of context, but, I mean, on one hand, you can understand
Right.
her naivete on one hand, but on another, you're sitting here wondering whether you're gonna
Yeah.
get pulled out of the murky water.
Right. Exactly.
And there seems to be more things, much more
Yeah,
important
important
than
thing. You're right. Exactly.
your stupid birthday.
Right. Right. But it's amazing. It's really amazing. And then,
If you ever had the chance to talk like this to
Mhm.
some of the people back home,
Mhm.
it's probably not a good idea anyhow, but.
right. Right. But so like I say,
So how much longer did you have to stay?
Okay. Then when I started getting, and this is the killing part of it. When I started getting short, but during that time, when you had 30 days left to go, they would send you in the rear to get your things together and everything, to the base camp, get your stuff together, and then send you to the rear to get ready for you to D-rolls. And I was looking forward for the 30 days, and so what happened once I got to 30 days, I told they were finna go on a 3-day, another 3-day ambush, and so I told the captain, I said, Captain, I said, I'm short. I said, I got 30 days. I said, that'll put me over. He said, don't worry. He says, after 3 days, we're gonna send a chopper in and pick you up. And I was like, no, I said, I really don't really want to go. I said, because you're sitting watching all these guys leave and go in the rear once they get 30 gone. All of a sudden now I got to stay over. And I was like, Captain, I said, I just don't want to stay, So he says, you're gonna have to go. He says, because if you refuse to go, you're gonna get court-martialed. And I was like, man, I said, here I am this short. Now I got to worry about getting court-martialed for refusing a direct order. And so what happened? They were getting ready to move out, and there was a Vietnamese kid. His name was Tu. He came around helping fill sandbags, at base camp and stuff, fill sandbags, for the bunkers and stuff. And so he says, you lead? He said, G.I., you lead? I said, yeah. I said, we're going to, I forgot what area we was going in. I can't think what area we was going in, but he looked at me and said, ooh, he said, Buku VC. He said, Buku Kakadao you, Buku Kakadao you. And I was like, huh? He said, oh, Buku VC. Buku mean a lot. He's telling me a lot of VCs in the area that we were going. And naturally, I'm getting paranoid now. So I went back to Captain. I said, hey, Captain, look. I said, little two just said, there's Buku VCs there. I said, I'm short. I just don't want to go. He says, you gonna listen to a little Vietnamese kid? I said, well, look. I said, he knows more about this country than I do, than you do. I said, sir, I said, I'm not going. I'm not going. I figured 30 days I want to go in the rear. He said, okay, if you refuse the direct order, you're going to be court-martialed. I said, I guess I'll be court-martialed. So they left out, they sent a helicopter in, they picked me up, took me back to the base camp. Well, for to tell you, I'm going to tell you the top of your head off. It was an underground communication area where they had a brigade of NVA to protect the communication thing. We lost half our company.
On that trip, you would have taken.
And I was in the rear. Waiting to get court-martialed. Of course, I never got court-martialed. So my time was up for that. But the only thing strange was that I had my foot locker that I had there. Cause you get R&R there. You get R&R. I went to Hong Kong, and we get a 7-day leave. You get R&R. Went to Hong Kong.
7 days.
7 days in Hong Kong. Then you get a 7-day leave. Then you get a 7-day leave, and then you get R&R, rest and recuperation. So I had 2.
How long were those?
Like 3 days, like 3 days, and when I came back in the rear, I had went to Hong Kong and I bought some suits from Lee and James company. They were silk suits. They were real nice. They were real cheap. They were real nice. I got back, all my stuff was gone. I had pictures. Pictures I had taken, and all my cameras, all my everything. My foot locker was empty. So I can't say if a GI had done it, or at that time the government had done it, because maybe they want certain pictures maybe to get back or something.
Mm-hmm.
Still today, I have no idea. I have no idea.
So where do you go from here now? You're in the rear. What's the process to getting you back to the U.S.?
Well, they process you, give you. And another thing was I went back on temporary records because they say my records were destroyed, and I was like, So when we left, then again, a lot of things come from. I said when I had malaria, maybe they want me to come back and maybe apply for disability um, um, for the malaria that I had. And maybe they didn't want me to come back with any, but I thought it was just me, but kind of found out a lot of them came back with temporary records. They said they were destroyed. And so, so we got back to California. They made up some temporary records. That's how I D-rose, right? But then it's a funny thing. But once I got out of the military, I sent for my original records, and it had everything in there where I was at. What I did, the wards I got, but didn't have anything about being in the hospital. Didn't have anything in there about that. Nothing. So.
Well, if that happens, there's no record.
No record, right.
For what may later become a problem that you need to file.
Exactly.
Well,
So there's no record. And then they'll say, well, I had 18 more months to do. So I was assigned to Germany. Okay, I was assigned to Germany to spend 18 months in Germany. As I get to Germany, I was with a tank unit. Okay, and they were in process of training to go to Vietnam, and I just left from Vietnam. And what happened was it was a big adjustment for me because you're leaving the terrain, the jungles, the heat, into a cold climate that was cold. They were trained at Grafenwehr, which temperature was like 3 or 4 or 5 below zero. I mean, that was a big difference trying to adjust it. I just couldn't really adjust, and I didn't make a good soldier in Germany because, for one reason, is because the lieutenant that was over us in Germany, he hasn't been, so he was training, but he was sort of looked at me as being, I was the only one of my troop in Germany that already had Vietnam experience, so he was looking at me cross-eyed because he just didn't have the respect that he felt like he should have had because of me being around. I really think he was trying to get rid of me, some kind of way. And I felt it because he was overdoing different things. All the other people in the troop were getting passes going to Sweden and Copenhagen and places like that. And I didn't get any. And then that was a corporal when I left, people kept telling me, man, Dexter, just be cool. They said, you're going to make sergeant and everything, But at that point, I didn't like the weather. I didn't like, and it was more garrison over there. You get up in the morning, you had to spit shine your boots and stuff. And, you're walking in the jungles, mud all over your shoes and stuff, and leaves in there. It was just a big change for me, If I had maybe, I did have a 30-day leave before I went over there. But I went over there. So what happened, I didn't click too well. I got in trouble. What happened was in formation, and that was during the time when Dr. King had got killed, and there was a lot of protesting within the Army about that. A lot of people were rebelling and stuff. It wasn't so much about that, but I was just getting tired. So one particular day, I was in formation, and in Germany, and that's why they last long over there, and they were saluting the flag. So everybody had the steel pots on the weapon, but there was no live ammunition in the weapons. They were just weapons. We had a steel pot on the weapons. And that particular day, I just decided that I'm tired. I'm just tired. I'm just tired. And I didn't take my steel pot off. So I had my back turned, and one of the officers came up behind me and took the back of his hand, and he knocked the steel pot off the back of my head and hit me. It was from the back. It was like out cold. It was like back of my head. And I clocked, naturally. I clocked. Things got to flash in my mind about Vietnam. I'm thinking about the people that I loved, that I lost. And for some reason, he looked like a Viet Cong. And of course I attacked him. And I got in trouble. And what happened, I went to, I went to Old Coleman Barracks. Okay, I suppose it did 6 months. I suppose it took 6 months of my pay, busted down to Private E1 for disrespect, assault on an officer. So they took my pay for a 2/3 pay for supposed to be 6 months, and took my rank from me, which is corporal down to Private E1. So while I was in, it was called Old Coleman Barracks. It was in Newburgh. I was there for like 2 weeks. We were building pallets, building pallets in jail. So an officer from the liaison office came to visit me. He says, Dexter, he says, I looked at your records, and he said, I don't know what happened. He said, but you was a good soldier in Vietnam, He said, so apparently you didn't fit in too good here, I was like, I don't know what to say, So he said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. He says, we'll give you a choice. He said, either you can spend your 6 months here, Old Coleman Barracks, or I can give you orders to go back to Vietnam and give you a 30-day leave to go home, go back to Vietnam. So I got to thinking, I said, well, send me back. I was like, I won't stay here 6 months. Send me back. I went home 30 days and get shipped out, and that's the second tour of duty. I was in 101st Airborne Division. Never jumped out of a plane in my life, but they put me in 101st Airborne Division because they weren't doing jumps over there at the time anyway. But they had lost so many men over there that they needed replacements. So I was assigned. I guess they were trying to kill me. I guess it was a good way to get rid of it. But I made it.
So how do you assess all that? I mean, it's pretty apparent, you can tell what your attitude was. This was a difficult adjustment for you to make.
Definitely so.
And there's always downtime. Many soldiers that come back directly from combat like this have an awful difficult time adjusting to the civilized world, particularly those that spend time in the kind of terrain and the kind of activity that you were involved in. And the body, mind probably more than the body, can't make those.
It was, to be honest with you, I had a little difficult time when I came back home. But it seemed like the people that I grew up with, I knew they were just different. They were just, I guess I was just ahead of my time because I'd been through so much, and they were like younger, and the things that they were talking about doing, it just didn't appeal to me. Things like, hey, there's a party over here, and you want to go, and I'm like, at that time, I'm like, I wouldn't just, I'm like, I was just more sheltered. I just didn't. But then they were smoking weed, they were using they were using cocaine and stuff, and that wasn't part of me, And so I just stayed away. I just stayed, stayed on my own, basically, stayed to myself, when I come back. Then my brother, he was involved with which really helped me. He was involved with a company. I don't know if you remember. You remember this guy named Glenn W. Turner? Dare to Be Great. He formed his corporation. It was a self-motivation corporation.
What was the name again?
Dare to Be Great. Nobody ever heard of it?
Who ran that?
Yeah, Glenn W. Turner.
Glenn Turner.
Glenn W. Turner. Self-motivator.
I've heard of the Dare to Be Great, but the name Turner doesn't.
Yeah, Glenn W. Turner. He's one of the founder of it. My brother was heavily involved in it, and I had come home and I got a job at Procter & Gamble. It was kind of a physical job. I worked in an ivory department where we had to poke soap powder on the bins, on the belt, so the soap powder come through, but we had to wear these masks. I didn't really like the job. Paid good money at P&G, but brother comes along, hey, join Dare to Be Great, you can be rich, and you can do this. And so I went to a couple of meetings. They called Go Tour meetings, where it had all these people around with money on them and saying go, 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 and people driving Cadillacs. I'm like, okay. Not realizing that a lot of them driving Cadillacs, they really couldn't afford a time, but that was the name of the thing as far as fake it till you make it, basically. So I got tied up with that. My brother, he brought me into it, and I quit the job at Procter & Gamble, but what I did learn from it was self-motivation as far as believing in yourself. It got me to reading positive books that normally I never read, books like Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends, Influence People, The Magic of Believing, Cybernetic, positive books. And that, even though the organization didn't last, it folded up because they said he was selling unregistered securities or something, but but I was trained to be an area director, and it was new to me. You know, I was like, well, this is good. You know, something. I mean, it was something different, and they taught me how to put on the first part of the meeting and stuff, and you know, so that's what really between Dare to Be Great and just the concept of the positive thinking helped me. You know, it helped me through life. You know.
Whatever happened to getting busted down to private? Was that ever reversed, or?
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't reversed there, but when I went back to Vietnam, I was in the 101st Airborne Division, but down that second tour of duty, it wasn't as bad as the first because by me spending a year over there already, I had to respect, and I got away with a lot of stuff. You know, stuff I didn't want to do, I just didn't do it. Nobody bothered me because they all, the old vet, he's a bit over here already, you know, and they just didn't bother. So, you know, I just got away with a lot of stuff, you know. They tell me to do something, I said, no, you know, I'm not gonna do that, you do it, you know, okay, whatever, it's crazy, you know, whatever. But I got away with it because I was the only one over there at the time that had been through over there the first time already. So the second tour duty wasn't that bad for me.
And how about your rank? Did you ever get that?
Yeah, I got my rank back. I got my rank back to make corporal. But it just seemed like that trying to make sergeant, I just never I never did the stuff. I was always just a for real kind of person. I never went out the way to do things to please a person because I want something out of them, you know. And it seemed like the people who were going for the rank, they were doing things that I couldn't do, you know. I said, well, I'm not going to bring the captain coffee, you know, because unless he asked me, you know, just to do it because I want something out of him, you know. So I stayed at corporal, you know. I just never made it. I just never made it to sergeant because my mind was just on doing my time and getting out. Because I've seen a lot of people killed with stripes. When you get buried with them, it doesn't make any difference.
They don't mean a whole
Don't
lot
mean a whole lot.
because you don't wear them when you're on
Right.
troop.
No, you don't. You don't wear.
For reasons.
Right.
You don't want anybody to know.
Right. So, but the second year it was yeah, it wasn't bad. I've been to Cameron Bay a couple times. Had Bob Hope, he came to Cameron Bay and had the USO show and stuff. Seen that, you know, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. How close did you get?
Real close.
Really?
They had a bandstand, and the stage was like like from that wall maybe 4 or 5 feet back. Here, with that close.
Did you get to go up and dance with the dancers?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't do none of that. No, I didn't do none of that. You know, but that was good relief, right? And then by me having a little experience with the mortar, so I spent more time with the 101st on the mortar platoon. You know, on my records, I had some experience with mortar, so that's why my second tour duty wasn't as bad. Wasn't as bad.
Did this require that you re-enlist for another term?
You know what's funny? You mentioned that. I got a copy of my records maybe about 10 years ago because I was a veterans rep at Chrysler. I retired from Chrysler at Dodge Truck Division. I was co-chairman of the Veterans Committee there, and you know, so I had sent for my records, and I didn't even know all the time they had barred me from because I had got court-martialed. They had barred me from re-enlistment. I was like, all this time I didn't even know. I was like, wow. But I still got the records at home. I was like, it's interesting. I guess because of the court-martial, I guess. But anyway, I wasn't planning on going in anyway. But it was just something how you find out stuff that years later. Right.
Was there any relief of the pressure and the stress when you got home, or was it just creating some new stress because you had to rehab into civilian life, so to speak?
Well, I had some things, you know, you remember, some things you really want to forget. I just don't want to sit up here and just tell, you know, exactly everything that I went through because we'll be sitting here for like 5 days, you know. But it was, some was good, some was bad. I can remember a friend, well, Gaddy Dark, well, I won't mention his name, but a friend of mine had said, come on, Walker, he said, you know, you're coming back from Vietnam and everything. He says, I'm gonna buy you some, I'm gonna take care, because, you know, I didn't have that many clothes, but the clothes I had was old fashioned, then I had my military stuff. He says, I'm gonna get you some clothes, I'll help get you some clothes. He said, come on, I'm gonna take, I said, oh, that's pretty good of him, you know, I said, pretty nice. So went down to this it was called Toes at the time, and we went down to Toes, and he had a credit card, and he was buying stuff for himself, and he said, "You like?" I'm over to look at the racks. Oh, I like that. Go ahead and get it. I was like, "Wow, this is a good friend," you know. Didn't know it was a stolen credit card. I didn't know it was a stolen credit card. I had no clue. And so I got the stuff laying on top of the calendar, and the next thing you know, the store people came and said, but we didn't get. They arrested him, but they didn't arrest me because he wanted to get a credit card, and I was like shocked because I didn't know, But the funny thing is, I never went to court for that. Never heard anything else about it. But when I applied for I was in Huntsville, Alabama. Me and my family moved down there for 3 or 4 years, and I had applied for a CCW down there because I was going to do security work down there. And they declined me. I said, "Why did I decline?" They said, "Well, you got on your record back in 1969, possession of a stolen credit card." I'm like, "What?" But they put on my record. I was with him, but I mean that was something. After all them years, it was still on my record.
Were you able to get it expunged?
Yeah, I did. I got it. I went down there through the week one day and went down there and explained. First, they wanted me to go to court and everything for it, but they realized during that time. But I ended up getting expunged, so then I ended up had to get a clearance because I worked at the Super Bowl here, and when the Super Bowl came here with a security company with Strategic Security, I worked at the Super Bowl, armed security. But it was interesting, so I was able to get it off. But this idea, you never know. You just never know. The stuff that's on your record, until you really check. Mm-hmm.
When you came back, what was your plan, or how did you get yourself located with Chrysler?
Okay, when I D-rose from Cincinnati after the Dare to Be Great thing came about, I said, I was looking for, after the Procter & Gamble thing, I was trying to find another job. I did get one job at Cincinnati Milling Machine. My father worked there. It was where they made tools and stuff, but it was so much noise, it was so loud, and it drove me crazy. That my dad said, "You gonna quit a good job like that?" I said, "I can't take it." It was just loud. When you talk to somebody, you have to holler, And I said, "This is not for me." So my brother had said that he's planning on dropping my cousin off in Detroit, and said, "You want to ride down? With us?" And I said, "I may as well. I'm not working. I'm doing it. I'll ride down with you." And when we came to Detroit, it was just something about Detroit that it was different. I guess. Well, Cincinnati is the kind of city that you see someone driving a Cadillac, or let's say a Cadillac or a Lincoln or something. They're stepping out in a suit, or a doctor, a lawyer. But I never seen so many people in Detroit that step out of big cars wearing blue jeans and gym shoes. The big three was going, strong then. I was like, that was something new to me because Cincinnati was a conservative city where I come from. And seeing something like that, it did something to me. I was like, wow. So I said, you know what? I think I'm gonna stay. My brother left. I stayed. Didn't know anybody. I gave blood at the blood bank, just enough to get something to eat. And my first job here in Detroit was at a shoe store, and had a sign that one experienced salesman wanted. I seen the sign. I never sold shoes before, but I told them that I'd be willing to work on probation. You don't have to pay me anything, just prove I can sell. But I knew they couldn't work me for nothing. They had to pay me. So I guess that impressed them. They went on to hire me selling shoes, and that's the first job I had when I got here. I sold shoes at Butler Shoe Store downtown. I didn't know anybody. And then then from there they cut back because for some reason they were moving or something. And then I went to the paper and I found advertisement about truck driving. Never drove. I drove trucks like small, not semis. So I seen an advertising paper that said truck driver wanted, and it was a company called it was on Pequot and Woolward called Fine Metal Company. It was near that market, and I didn't know it was a semi. And so I walked in there, asked the guy, I told the guy, I said, I'm here for the job. So he said, "Have you driven a semi before?" I need a job so bad, I just lied to him and said, yeah. I had experience. I had no experience driving a semi. But I think I can learn like anything else. I was always a challenger. So what he did, he says, okay, so he trusted me for the case, so he hired me. So they had a bunch of metal and stuff that I supposed to have taken to, I think it was Romulus or somewhere out there. And he said, "You know how to get there?" I said, "Oh yeah, I know exactly how to get there." I I didn't know anything about how to get there. I figured I can always ask somebody. So I got the semi, and it was a gas station right there on Pequot and Woolward. And I pulled up. I was only half a block away. I pulled up in the gas station, and the overhead, overhead thing was down. I didn't pay attention. I drove up. I knocked that whole side of the wood. Wood came down. Birds came down. I was like, God, dog, just got the job. I said, oh man, I was messed up. So so I called the company and told him I had a little incident. He ran down there and he kept hollering, what are you doing? What are you doing? I said, hey man, I didn't see it. He said, you told me you can drive. You told me you drive. He said, I don't need you. I don't need you. I don't know what made me look at him and say, what day do I get paid? He looked like I was crazy. I think he wanted to kill me. But anyway, so much of that. But then from there, I met some other veterans along the way, and they were saying that Chrysler was hiring. And so I went and put an application at the unemployment office of Chrysler, and I got hired at Chrysler. But it's a funny thing, the job, how I got the first job at Chrysler. I had my Army jacket on, and I had my, I had my first airborne patch on this side. I had my 25th infantry patch on this side, and the supervisor that was putting us on job sites, he came around and he was putting people on sites and stuff. So he looked over there. He says, "You was in the 25th?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "What division?" I said, "I was in the what brigade?" I said, "2nd Brigade." He said, "Well, I was in the 1st Brigade." He says, "Well, you stand here and look out for him." I'm like, okay, whatever. He walking everybody else around, putting them on the line, on the line stuff. They came back to me and said, "This is gonna be your job right here." And I said, "What job is that?" He says, "You're gonna be a tool crib operator." So what I do? He said, "Just issue out the coveralls when the paint was in the paint shop. When the painters come around, when they come in the afternoon, I work the afternoon shift." He says, "You issue out the coveralls, and that's going to be your job." I said, "Well, what else do I do?" He said, "That's up to you." I was like, "Huh?" He walked away. I was like, "Huh?" So I mean, I had a job like 12 years at Chrysler. That's what got me to start. I worked I was a tool crib operator. All I did was issue our coveralls, and when people got the coveralls, they got their job. Once everybody started up, I went down and picked up coveralls from the tool room and bought them up, put them in there for the next day. I mean, actually my job was through. But there was a lot of people that was trying to take my job at the time because they felt like, I didn't have enough seniority and how did he get this job. But what happened was, now I can talk about this since I'm not there anymore, but the supervisor liked me because I got in a good relationship with the main tool room guy, because anytime you had to get something from the tool room, you had to fill out a requisition. But since I knew the guys, they just give it to whatever I needed. So whenever he operated under cost, he got a bonus check, because he didn't have to sign his name to a requisition. I just go down there and get, 10 more pair of gloves or 10 pair of coveralls. And so people try to take my job, he was saying like, ain't no way. So that's how I kept that job so long.
You got 5 minutes, Pete.
Oh, okay.
Pete? Right.
So when did you said you retired from?
Yeah, I retired from Chrysler on disability. What happened, I had a couple incidents on the job at Chrysler. I had, prior to me joining the Veterans Committee, I was a co-chairman of the Veterans Committee down the road for about 9 years. It was 5 of us. I was only real vet that was on the committee. The rest of them wasn't really vets, but the chairman, he wasn't a veteran actually, so it was kind of hard working under him. So I joined the Veterans Committee, so we did various things, helping various groups, organizations, regional level, company level. We put out literature that we learned from the VA to help some of the other veterans and stuff there, so basically that's it.
Do you have any pictures you want to share with us?
Okay, yeah, sure do. I do have some right here. Okay, this here is a picture, one of the pictures. We was at the main office. One of them is T, and the other one is, we call him Baby Bra. We was at base camp, and that was at Benoit.
Benoit?
With the 101st Airborne Division.
That looks like a real homey place.
Right, and this is me. I was in the process of shipping out, going on R&R.
Oh my God!
Right.
Oh, That's funny. Good gravy. I would have never picked that out.
Yeah. And
Wow.
yeah, this is another picture of me holding the M60 machine gun.
You look a little
Yeah,
better here.
and that was I think that was right before I think we had a 3-day ambush. That's with the 101st Airborne Division.
Boy.
And this is we was in a helicopter. We was making a CA. That picture, the back of the head, that's the gunner, and that's one of the other ones sitting on the side of the helicopter. I'm gonna go through all of them, and then this here is the village we was in. We were on patrol, and there were some kids that we took.
Do you
took a picture
think
with.
being black,
Mhm.
were you viewed differently by the Vietnamese people? I don't know how familiar they were with.
Actually, I'm gonna tell you something. To be honest with you, it was more so by the unit we was in. It was certain units that the Vietnamese people didn't like, and the 101st, I mean the 25th Infantry, the 101st, they didn't care too much about. Now we would go to town and something, and we had to take off our patch or wear something because they just didn't like. I think there was a bad reputation when the war first started. For some reason, I think the 101st went over there, and I think they were doing things that scared a lot of people. I can't pinpoint exactly what.
Mm-hmm.
I heard rumors, but I don't talk about rumors. Facts. I don't know the real facts of it. But as far as racism, I didn't really see it. The reason I didn't see it because we were all brothers over there because we had to cover for each other.
Yeah.
Well, they're like hating this guy next to me because he's white, and he had to be the main one maybe to cover for me, or same way with me.
Well, but I don't know that Vietnamese people ever
Vietnamese
saw black people before Americans came over there. Maybe I'm wrong, but what was your reaction
okay,
from that, you think?
like we call them Papa San, Mama San. I really didn't see it. If it was there, I really didn't see it because number one, we didn't spend a whole lot of time in town areas. Now maybe like someone that spent a lot of time in the town area could probably tell you more, but we didn't really spend a lot of time in town. Most of our time was spent like at base camp or in the villages.
Well, your comments are interesting because we had another interview, and
Mm-hmm.
this guy was World War II, and
Mm-hmm.
he was a Mustang flyer,
Mm-hmm.
and you're familiar with the trouble they had trying to get commissioned officers, and when they found out that blacks did have the brains to do it,
Right.
they performed better in many cases than the others. In any case, he said a bond got created between the bombers and the red-tipped Mustangs, because those were the ones flown by the group out of, what was that? Tuskegee.
Tuskegee, okay. So it's
Tuskegee
only Tuskegee, Airmen, yeah.
And that was the only way for them to know.
Okay.
And when they had opportunities later,
Right.
they asked for the Tuskegee rather than anybody else to be the support for the bombing
Right,
runs. And he said, you built a brotherhood, but he said, unfortunately, the minute you got off the boat in New York City, it was back to the old routine again.
Right.
Brother who?
Yeah. Right.
He said it was amazing. It was just so blatant.
Yeah.
Well, you're coming back into another country though that's still stuck in the past.
Stuck in the past. Yeah.
You were out in a new country that you were.
That's true. But now, when you mention that, I can tell you, like Germany. Now, Germany was a lot of different myths that were going about black people because I found out this before I got there. At one time, the German women wouldn't even associate with the black soldiers over there because they were told that the black soldier had tails. And this is something, this is something that, that was, before I went over there, this is something that I learned. And then one time they said they had this black guy got up on the stage, pulled his pants down, and where's it, he didn't have a tail.
Yeah.
And, it's fun, I mean, but those are all myths, but.
Well, that same situation
Right.
occurred at Iwo Jima
Uh-huh.
when the Japanese were being beaten. They told all of the people there that the Americans were going to come in and rape the young and
Yeah.
kill everybody and
Right.
all this, and they all jumped off cliffs and
Uh-huh.
stuff.